Military alliances are often portrayed as preparations for war. More allies. More weapons. Bigger budgets. But the data tells a stranger story. Over the past 3 decades, the number of military alliances has risen sharply. Yet in many countries, military spending has actually declined. There has been no surge in major conflicts. No global emergency. Only a slow, almost invisible, shift in how states manage security. More surprising still, small states and great powers respond in opposite ways. Some increase their weapons budgets after joining alliances. Others do the opposite, staying quiet and spending less. This is not a story about war. It's a story about cost. About who truly pays for global security. And who learns to survive without firing a single shot. If we focus only on the headlines, we miss the signal. Because behind the alliances, the world is quietly recalibrating how it stays alive. The most common instinct says this. When a country gains more allies, it must increase its military budget. More commitments. More obligations. More cost. But the data points in the opposite direction. When economic factors, country size, and global shifts are held constant, adding one new alliance is associated with a decline in military spending the following year. The effect isn't dramatic, but it is consistent. And crucially, it is statistically significant. This changes how we understand alliances. Alliances do not function as a simple accumulation of power. They function as substitutes. Security is no longer built solely from tanks, warships, or national defense budgets. Some of it is borrowed. Some of it is shared. Some of it is promised. Within an alliance system, threats are not always met with new weapons, but with the presence of partners. With the signal that conflict with one state means facing many. At this point, alliances change their role. Not as preparations for war, but as cost-saving mechanisms within the global security system. And that is precisely why military spending does not always rise. If alliances truly worked uniformly, the outcome would be simple. Every country would respond in the same way. But that is not what we see. The impact of alliances depends heavily on economic size and on where a country sits within the global system. For small states, joining an alliance is often not the end of military spending, but the beginning of it. Their threats are real and close. Limited territory, scarce resources, and almost no margin for error. Alliances may still be immature. Collective promises are not yet fully reliable. So small states continue to add weapons as insurance. Middle powers are different. At this level, alliances begin to truly function. They are large enough to be trusted, but not large enough to stand alone. The result is clear: military spending declines. Security is no longer built in isolation, but anchored in a network. Then there are great powers. Here, the effect is almost non-existent. Military spending neither rises nor falls. It remains stable. Not because they are indifferent, but because they are in control. For major powers, alliances are not protection. They are instruments of influence and leverage. At this point, one thing becomes clear. Alliances are not a universal formula. They work differently depending on where a country stands. At the margins of the system, in the middle, or at the center of global power. For decades, one assumption has gone largely unchallenged. If anyone free rides within an alliance, it must be small states. The logic seems obvious. They are weak. They are poor. They depend on others. But the data breaks that assumption. The most cost-saving states after joining alliances are middle powers. Not the smallest. Not the most vulnerable. Small states rarely have the luxury of free riding. Their threats are too close. Their borders are fragile. Their regional environments are unstable. In such conditions, collective promises alone are not enough. Moreover, many small states face upfront demands for contribution. They must show up. They must deploy forces. They must demonstrate commitment. Or risk being seen as a burden rather than a partner. And most importantly, there is a political factor often overlooked: loyalty. Small states need to prove they are worth defending. That if conflict comes, they are not merely free passengers. By contrast, middle powers occupy a safer position. Important enough to matter. Large enough not to be ignored. And strong enough to scale back contributions without losing protection. This is where free riding truly occurs. Not at the edges of the system, but at its center. This complaint is often heard. Great powers pay too much to protect their allies. But the data reveals a far colder picture. When major powers add new alliances, their military spending does not spike. But it does not fall either. It remains stable. This is not an accident. It is design. For great powers, alliances are not safety nets. They already have those. Alliances are tools of management. Through alliances, major powers spread security burdens without surrendering control. They set the standards. They write the rules. They define the threats. Alliances allow great powers to enforce discipline. Who must contribute? How much is considered enough? And who is allowed to depend? In this framework, great powers are not victims of free riding. They are the architects of the system. And as long as military spending remains stable, alliances become the most efficient way to sustain global influence, without constantly increasing costs. During the Cold War, alliances were front lines of war. Bloc against bloc. Always ready to collide. Today, their function has changed. Modern alliances are not built to fight, but to prevent the fight from happening in the first place. They operate as stabilization mechanisms, containing escalation before it turns into open conflict. A single strike no longer triggers a single response, but a level of strategic uncertainty that is far more costly. Alliances also reduce the risk of direct confrontation. Not because the world is more peaceful, but because the cost of miscalculation has become too high. War no longer involves just two states, but entire networks. Behind all of this lies a logic rarely stated out loud: budget efficiency. Alliances allow states to share intelligence, logistics, training, and deterrence, without duplicating everything at the national level. This is the modern paradox. The number of alliances grows. Military cooperation expands. Yet major wars become rarer. Not because the world is safe, but because the risks and costs of war are now managed, not pursued. Military alliances often look like promises of war. Flags are raised. Treaties are signed. And the world appears increasingly armed. But behind the symbols, the story is different. Alliances today are not simply about who fights whom. They are about who bears the costs, who shares the risks, and who controls the direction of the global system. Small states struggle to prove their worth. Middle powers learn how to economize. Great powers design the rules of the game. And it is precisely there that stability emerges. Not from the absence of conflict, but from cold calculation. If we see alliances only as preparations for war, we miss the more important reality. The world has not stopped arming itself. It has simply learned to manage power more quietly.